Dear colleagues, the picture you see behind is taken here from Germany last summer during the terrible floods. If you focus on the rear window of the car, you can see a text. It says, "Fuck you, Greta." Now, not everybody likes youth climate activists. That's the first thing to learn. Secondly, if you look at the context of the picture, you can see that maybe somebody should have learned and listened to Greta. And this is my topic. Do we listen to Greta? Is European youth policy, is European youth work listening to her? So, just a few years ago, we saw a spectacular number of young people, up to 8 million, going out to streets, having a climate strike for better climate policies. But it's not the young people alone. The most recent special Eurobarometer on climate change has showed that 93% of Europeans believe that climate change is a serious issue. And up to 80% think that it is a very serious issue. So the young people are not alone on this one. And of course, young people were the most worried age population in that one. As was told already, EU has acted on this. We have had the EU Green Deal, which was actually followed by European Climate Pact last year, which tries to spread the awareness of this issue and support any action in the field. It's a kind of a general strategy program. And interestingly, it gave credit to the youth climate demonstrators. It said that they have captured the world's attention and shaped the discussion on climate change. That's quite positive to read from an official document. And furthermore, they invite young people to use the pact to drive systemic and intergenerational change for society as a whole. So there's even an invitation for the youth field to join in collaboration. The Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which is backed up by all the research that there is in the world about the phenomenon, just a few months ago published a report, and it says, unless there are immediate, rapid and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 Celsius will be beyond reach, which is actually exactly what the young people have said. So the question is, how has the youth field reacted? I would a little bit disagree with the previous speaker saying that the EU has done quickly everything that it could have. I think EU has not been in all fronts very quick on this issue, and I'll come to that particularly as regards the youth field. But during the 2019 EU presidency, Finland wanted the Council, the ministers, to have a debate on a theme called A Vision for Youth Work in Europe, Climate Change, Young People and Youth Work. And in those debates, there was an overall recognition that it's important for youth work to link with climate change. So that was the overall thinking of the respondents. So I was actually contacted some half a year ago by Hanyo, who said that, can you come here to this little city and talk us about what the governments think about this thing? And I was too eager to say yes, I am glad to come, but only afterwards I realized I don't actually know about that. So I decided that I would need a little bit more data, and so I planned to carry a little survey. And this little survey was then carried out with the people responsible for youth work in the governments, in the member states. And it was commissioned by the Finnish Ministry of Education. It was under the consent of the Portuguese then presidency in the European Union, and with the help of the Secretariat of the Council. And that little survey was carried May and June this year, and it was a very short 3-page electronic survey, a questionnaire which only had 9 questions. And the 9 questions wanted to look at what is the impact of the youth demonstrations in the member countries, and particularly to their youth work and youth policy. So it's not a study which deeply covers everything, but maybe we can get something to think based on that. Another problem with that was that despite numerous reminders, we only got 14 responses from the member countries, which gives us a 52% response rate, which of course was a disappointment for us, and means that we had to keep in mind certain reservations in interpreting that data. For instance, when I will show you some figures from this survey, you had to keep in mind that they are maybe rough estimates than truths of reality or fact. But nevertheless, I think they are good enough to raise questions and start talking about those topics which they raised. And then, of course, as a researcher, I'm obliged to note that due to the 48% non-response, the data that we are dealing with is underrepresented. I don't know, but perhaps it's underrepresented by those people who kind of hesitate to accept the urgency of climate warming and those people who probably don't see that there should be not much thanks to youth work after all, and that's why they didn't vote, didn't take a part in this survey. That we don't know. Anyway, with these reservations in mind, the first thing that we asked the people was that, considering the novelty of climate change as a topic of youth work, how widely is it taken into account in youth work organizations in your country? And 64% said that some youth work organizations have taken it on their agenda. A good third, 36% said that many youth work organizations have taken it on their agenda. So if we can believe this, it means that the climate change is emerging on the agenda of youth work. Now, we wanted to see a little bit more concretely what did that emergence mean. So we asked them, has climate change appeared on the youth work and youth policy agenda in your country? And then we made certain statements where we let them evaluate them, how did they fit in the conditions of their respective countries, and we got this percentage table. If you have a kind of a quick, rough look at the percentages, I think one important thing to note is that the respondents are divided. There are people who think differently on the relationship between youth work and climate change. That's one thing. But still, you can see that 50% said that in my country, youth has been taken as a climate as a priority. Climate change has become a priority. The government has started capacity building programs. The youth work methods have been developed in the various countries. in climate change, and there has been some cross-sectoral project and all that, so very many positive indications that things would be happening in there. Strange, however, was that when one statement was asked, titled "Youth Workers have asked for training in climate change," that wasn't reported. So that's interesting. Why haven't the youth workers asked for training? It would be the first thing to ask for. Maybe that should be thought of maybe in more detail or even studied. So a third thing that I kind of noted from this data is that the responses were accumulating on two kind of possibilities to respond. Almost all said that they tend to agree or they tend to disagree. So I was kind of starting to think, what does it mean in English language when you say that you tend to agree or you tend to disagree? So after consulting various dictionaries, I found that there are three possibilities actually that this can mean. One, it means that people who take this choice, they reply according to the perceived probability that these things that are mentioned are happening. So it's a perceived probability. Secondly, it can reference also to ambivalence, uncertainty, hesitance, that I don't know, maybe yes. It's a reaction of hesitancy. And thirdly, answering this way also can refer to positive or negative inclination to the issue discussed, wish or hope. So answering tend to agree may also, instead of describing the perceived probability, may also describe the wish of the person that those things would happen in my country. So we don't know that yet for sure, but considering all those reservations, I think there are three things which can be concluded from this data, and looking at the kind of differences of answers. Maybe climate change is very new and is in a kind of an initial transitory period at this very moment. So there are some countries which have a kind of grabbed it and made it a priority and moved forwards stronger than others, while there are others who haven't done that yet, but are moving after. And maybe if we do another study, we can see that things have developed. But there is also another hypothesis, which is not that there is no development at all. There is no kind of a moving somewhere. People are just divided into two groups. There are those who think that youth work and youth policy should react to young people's climate concerns, and that concerns youth work and youth policy also, and it should be a priority in there. While there are other people who think that climate change is for other sector and other peoples, and we can't do anything about it, and it's not our beef in a way, so why wouldn't we have to care about it? So is it a kind of a development, or is it a division into two types of groups within the field? That's something that this survey can't answer. I would hope this answer to be replicated maybe next summer, so we could follow up which hypothesis is right. But, however, in the end, I think something can be concluded, and it's the fact that climate change has not yet become a universally adopted or determinately accepted priority in youth work. I think that can be concluded from the division of opinions and a certain amount of hesitancy in the people's answers. I'll come to this phenomena also later. Now, we also asked them and tried to find out why should the society, why should youth work react to climate change? And we asked the question, how important are the following reasons for the society to respond to the youth climate concern? And there were, I don't see if you can read, can you, by the way, see the text there? Oh, okay. So we gave them a few possibilities of what the society could do and why it should react. And clearly, as you look at the percentages, everybody seemed to be in favor of these options that we gave. So everybody seemed to think that we had to support young people's intergenerational right to take care of their future. We had to support young people's right to a safe future and well-being, devoid of risks, dangers, and inequalities caused by climate change. And they also thought that we should show trust to those young people, we should support their active citizenship. So all those four things, they kind of revolve around active citizenship and youth rights, which is the emancipation rhetoric in youth work that we know. While the two last ones, which were also supported by the respondents, say that the societies should react to youth climate concern because that would kind of hinder them from becoming frustrated about the society, and at worst to minimize that they would radicalize. And many people thought that that's a good reason enough for the society to intervene, to do something. That again is the integration rhetoric of the youth work that we know also from the histories and everywhere. And but okay, the kind of a youth policy makers from the member states who replied to this one, people in the key positions, they were quite unanimous that the society should react to youth climate concern. But how about the youth field itself? I think one of the things that the youth field itself should kind of respond to is the format of youth participation, climate strikes, demonstrations. And we asked the respondents straight that, do you think that the youth climate movement, like the school strike, is a sign of a changing form of youth participation? Andreas was also thinking of this, what does this mean? And then we had two options, yes, and the other option, which was chosen by 62%, said that yes, mass demonstrations are here to stay and inspire youth to apply it for other issues as well. So it's kind of a new way of expressing yourself, your citizenship. 38% said no, the school strike movement is a unique phenomenon. They will wither away and there will be new ones and so on. Probably if we remember the 48% non-response, I think that would have made the lowest figure bigger, I assume. That's just my kind of a civilized guess, scientific guess, but probably that would have happened. So there are two, I would say to a large extent, contradictory assumptions of what the youth demonstrations actually mean. For example, in terms of youth participation, maybe in terms of its possible changes. And both of these arguments or these orientations can be argued for. And if I start with the latter one, one can say that youth demonstrations like the Fridays for the Future, it is not a sustainable format. It's funny to see young people on the streets and the big numbers and all that, but is it sustainable? And I here refer to researchers, Dezelan et al., which are close to the European Youth Forum, which have concluded like this: spontaneous, non-hierarchical and non-institutional organizations can only wage unsystematic guerrilla warfare and will not have a coherent means or sustainable relations nor recognition to affect or impact societal decision-making structures. Which would imply that it is more efficient and proper for young people to express their concern through the existing hierarchically organized and institutionally embedded youth organizations. So we all are lobbying for our own case here. That's just for you to consider. But if we look at the member states' youth policy makers, because we ask also them, what has been the effect of youth climate activism, like the school strike demonstrations in your country? And we listed a few options. And here, clearly, the big majority of the respondents say that, yes, it's done a lot of positive things. It has affected public image of youth as active citizens. It has improved, so it has improved the public image of youth as active people. The demonstrations have increased the public awareness of climate change. There has been much more dialogue between the decision makers after those demonstrations, and it's received huge media visibility, particularly in the social media, and so on. So according to the youth policymakers, they think there are a lot of kind of a positive impact wherever those impacts actually lead to, but they seem to be very positive. However, there is an interesting statement, which is the next to the last one, which says that youth demonstrations did not have any serious effect on climate policies. And a good third, 36% said that yes, that is true. We agree. I agree on that one. And that's quite interesting, because there was a quite substantial amount of respondents, which could have been much larger if we wouldn't have the non-response, which thought that youth demonstrations are not really a good way of having a serious effect on where they are supposed to have, which is climate change policy making. So this begs the question, do the climate change demonstrations have an impact on policy making? This is a new thing to have happened, and we don't have much research on this one, but we have a live case which I like to share with you. 2019 fall, in Australia, young people inspired by Greta Thunberg organized huge amounts of youth demonstrations. They were striking school on Fridays to demand better climate policies from the government. It happened in all the big cities in Australia. They were very spectacular. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison got absolutely mad about it. And there was a tense relationship between the two. Now, the interesting thing was that a few months later, there was a poll which was published. It was a national poll which was based on a representative sample of Australians to give a good picture of what the public opinion thought about this. And there were two interesting findings coming out of it. The first interesting finding was that clearly the public was on the side of the young people, and they thought that really the government should do something about what the young people demanded. So they affected public opinion effectively and provenly. That's an interesting, that's a scientific fact actually. But the story is not as that good. This is a tragedy, so be prepared. it will not end good. So they made also in that same poll another question, because the general elections were coming on in Australia, and they asked, thinking about your vote at the next federal election, how important is it to you that political leaders commit to immediately taking serious action to tackle climate change? And the majority of people said that, yes, that's really important for me. And 93% of Labour voters said that that's very important or important. And as much as 80% thought that it's very important. So, during the coming years, it was publicly assumed that this would be climate elections, and it was kind of on the newspaper headlines, climate change to be a decisive issue in Australian elections because of the youth demonstrations. Then the elections came. After the elections, New York Times titled this article, "It was supposed to be Australia's climate election. What happened?" What happened was that at the last minute, Prime Minister Scott Morrison was able to turn the heads of the voters, and the government remained in power with its bad climate policies still there. In addition to kind of mobilizing his own supporters, the more interesting and important thing was that he succeeded to frighten Labour voters of the immediate costs and job losses that a change in climate policies would bring to ordinary workers' lives. You remember, before the elections, Labour voters said very strongly that it's important that political leaders commit to immediately taking serious action to tackle climate change. But they still voted Conservatives after this political campaign. So what can we kind of conclude from this? I think we can conclude that it seems that school strikers can make people and the public aware of long-term societal challenges, like the climate change. But when it comes as a threat to the personal, near future and everyday living standard, people can withdraw back. This was the real-life story. Okay, and we also know that Greta particularly has been openly mocked and ridiculed by the heads of the biggest polluting countries. You have been following this on your own. And also it seems that the climate movement, as regards the official negotiation tables, it's not been very successful, and some of the researchers have concluded that youth activist groups have been simply brushed aside as immature. But then again, if we think of it, first of all, we have to remember that the people who were studying the kind of member state youth policy decision makers, they were very positive at the impact of demonstrations. They listed a very long list of things that thought to be very positive. And on the other hand, before we are saying any or throwing any final judgment of whether the youth movements are effective, we had to remember that we still don't have much research on the whole process and how it affects young people and the society. We do not yet know exactly the exact effect on these movements, on media, public opinion, public debates, the entire youth generation, not to mention the effect on personal growth, awareness raising, identity development, and motivation to be active citizen, all those 8 million young people who participated in this case. So we need a lot of information, because being able to say that it's ineffective, it's effective. Well, let's see about it. And on the other hand, there are lots of kind of people who research social movements and civic society, like the German Siri Hummel, who is a long-term quantitative researcher of the civil society. What she says is that young people tend to engage more in digitalization and the environment. They are less committed to organizational contexts, are less institutional and more political. And in a way, as we are discussing this year, the shrinking civil space, it could be that, it clearly has been shrinking when we talk about the established organizations and established youth organizations maybe too. But on the other hand, there has been a lot of changes in the civic space, like the youth climate demonstrations, which might show, which might be seen as signs of transformation, and they surely have been discussing enormously. And there are researchers who have said that we should regard these as new forms of expressing young people's dissent, through which, as they go on, may gain important insight into social change, systems change, citizenship and democracy. So there might be changes happening which we should take seriously. Well, I just finish as a conclusion. Jamie Gorman isn't here yet, no? Oh, it's you. Oh, now I remember. Yes, yes. You have said, what I have written here is roughly that youth policy should make every effort to include the voices of young people who are engaging in climate politics through unconventional participation, including all forms of dissent, even radical dissent. And I mean, here we can kind of understand each other, I think. And this would be the other arguments. So there are two kinds of arguments, but yes, we can discuss about them. Now, about the future. In the near future, we asked, in the near future, are you planning to support youth action on climate change? And we made the following options for people to respond, and clearly a majority of the respondents said that in the near future we will prioritize youth climate action, we'll cooperate, we'll make more cross-sectoral cooperation in the field, we will improve the competencies of youth workers, and we will provide more resources and create kind of a better dialogue between young people and decision makers. So the policymakers in European member states say that in the near future they will do things to promote this case, which is interesting and good to know. However, even here I was kind of stuck by the fact that again the responses were accumulating on tend to agree. And one may ask, why tend to agree? I mean, those proposals that I made seem to be, for a youth field person, seem to be quite self-evident. They should have been done already, and not even in the near future. And still, most of the people hesitate. They are hesitating. So I think something that kind of characterizes this group I've been researching is that they are hesitantly favorable. So the youth field makers tended to support youth climate action, but hesitated to wholeheartedly agree. There seems to be an ongoing process to elaborate more clearly how exactly youth work should orient to climate change. And I suggest that maybe that's a question of the fact that there is an identity construction in process. It's not ready yet, but it still is in process. And yeah, and there are also kind of I can see there are also very difficult questions to be addressed in this sense. Things that I call dilemmas. Such difficult questions that there might not be good solutions at all. I mean, Skylla and Charybdis type of situations. And just to take an example, we made this question about in the near future what are you going to do, and one of the options was, and I took this separately, give moral support to the school strike movement. And to a little bit, at least my astonishment, only a fifth of the respondents said that yes, we should give moral support to the school strikers. Why so few? I mean, almost 80% either did not know at this stage of things happening or thought that school strikers should not be morally supported. I think the answer reveals a contradiction, a role conflict, and a dilemma between the dedication to support young people's own agency and administrative solidarity to the other public sector's institutions, like the school. So it's a difficult role conflict. Take this as just a funny case, is that in Finland, at the city of Helsinki, headmaster of a school sent a message to the parents just a few days before Friday. Although the reason is important enough, the students do not, however, have the right to strike. Next day, Timo Jalonen, who is the director of the entire Turku city on in education, said that striking for climate is a constitutional right of a child and it cannot be denied. So there you are. Dilemma indeed. And when youth work gets in between these dilemmas, it has to be sorted out somehow. Now, one of the reasons that there are these hesitancies, these dilemmas, these identity construction only in process, I think one of the reasons is that in the European level we don't have documents, strategies which give us concrete enough material to really reflect our identity and which don't give any guidance or directions on this issue. We know that the European Youth Strategy barely covers climate change. It barely is mentioned there. EU Youth Dialogue has not had climate change as a thematic priority. The final declaration of the third European Youth Work Convention, 20 pages, only gave 3 full lines starting making youth work green. That's not much of, even if, of course, my dear colleagues, it's a great paper as such, but that's there. And then Howard Williamson and Frederick Hoffman van der Poel just went carefully through the existing European youth strategies. And they found only very marginal note on climate change there. So it's not there. My final slide relates to a question: how should the youth field relate to EU European climate programs like the Climate Pact? And we asked how the youth field should relate itself to the educational programs on climate change, how the Climate Pact's programs, Erasmus Plus, and that was too quick. So the result was that they all were in favor. They all were in favor. Yes, that's what we can do. But my point again is that why only 50% could be sure that and say very clearly that yes, we totally agree. We should be collaborating with the other sectors on this issue, which is important to young people. And why is it that the European Youth Field, which has said that, which has praised that cross-sectoral cooperation is one of the prime objectives for the last 50, 60 years, and now there is the opportunity to do it, and there is urgency, and young people want it, why are they still hesitant to say that, let's go there? I'm a little bit, as a researcher, if I would be still director of Council Europe Youth Field, I wouldn't be so critical, perhaps. Huh? Well, so I just ask whether this is again a case of kind of a being hesitantly favorable, and whether this, at the worst case, leads to kind of, as Howard would say, a splendid isolation, isolated from the others, the great youth work that can do everything on its own, by itself. Now, yes, I will start now. And what the organizers actually wanted me to reflect was how to strengthen the capacity of youth work in the context of climate change, how to support young people, how to include all young people, and how we could, how the youth sector can act as partner in cross-sectoral cooperation. Yes, indeed. So first of all, I'd just like to refer, as to the last question, refer to a publication that, no publication, it's a paper so far that I have written with Kalala Mabuluki from France, who is finishing his dissertation on European youth policies. We have written a document titled Lost in Translation, Why Aren't Integrated Youth Policies Implemented in Practice? And I think this paper would perhaps provide some of the answers to the questions the organizers wanted. Yes, but as to the other one, as to the other questions, I'll condense them all in this, my final slide, and very shortly. So I think the key question is that how can we build the resilience and agility of youth work and youth policy to meet climate change? And I think there are some things which I think rose from this research that I was discussing with you. And one is that if there is something like a splendid isolation of the young people, of the youth field, youth policy, then we certainly would be moving strongly and determinedly and quickly to interagency collaboration. It's even offered to us. Secondly, we would move from hesitant ambivalence seen in the figures to a determined green youth work and youth policy strategy, which we don't have, but I think we should have, to help us sort out our identity, our ambivalence, and get a direction. And then also to maybe reconsider the existing notion of youth participation. If the changes are going on, maybe enlarging youth NGO representation to support and facilitate new civic space action. And also to reconstruct youth representation structures, the present ones, to meet the new forms of dissent. And then there is this identity conflict and the solidarity dilemmas which we discussed. I think here, generally, I mean, moving from this ambivalence, we should move maybe more to tolerance and facilitation of all forms of youth dissent. That was Jamie's and mine. And then I said that we should move from militant defense of youth. Oh, sorry, I had to say. By militant defense of youth, I refer to orientation in youth work, whereby youth workers should kind of questionably implement everything that the young people ask from them. And whatever they demand, the task of youth work is to, in the end, wage warfare against the establishment, the city hall, the government, the capitalism, the fossil industry, whatever. But I'm a former bureaucrat in the youth field, so I would adopt for a different kind of role, which would be mediation and dialogue of youth concerns with the society around us. That would be a different role, and we should think what that would mean. All right, and then finally we should design our youth work approaches, methods, and youth worker training accordingly. Thank you.